The snowbank outside the shelter doors had frozen solid overnight. I could see my breath in the cramped room where my son and I had been sleeping for the past 4 months. Marcus was still curled up under the thin blanket we shared, his small body pressed against mine for warmth. He was only 6 years old, and this wasn't the life I'd imagined for him when he was born. "Dad, is it morning yet?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the sounds of other families stirring in the shelter. "Not quite, buddy," I said, pulling him closer. "Just a bit longer." The divorce had happened 14 months ago. My ex-wife Vanessa had walked away with everything. Our house in Richmond Hill, our joint savings account that I'd spent 7 years building up to nearly $40,000, even the car we'd bought together. Her lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Theodore Whitmore, had buried me in paperwork I couldn't afford to fight. I'd shown up to court with a legal aid lawyer who'd met me 20 minutes before the hearing. "Mr. Brennan," Whitmore had said to me on the courthouse steps that day, his thin lips curled in something between a smile and a sneer. "You should have been smarter about this. You've got nothing now. Maybe you'll think twice before you cross the Morrison family again." The Morrison family. That's what Vanessa's parents, Gerald and Patricia Morrison, liked to call themselves. Old money from Burlington, or at least that's what they claimed. They'd never approved of me, the electrician who'd married their daughter. When things fell apart between Vanessa and me, they'd made sure I paid for it. I'd been living with Marcus in my pickup truck for 2 months before we found this shelter in Mississauga. The custody arrangement was bizarre. Vanessa had actually given me full custody during the divorce. At the time, I'd been too destroyed to question it. Now I understood. She didn't want the responsibility. She just wanted me to suffer, to struggle, to fail at raising our son while she lived comfortably in what used to be our home. I was a licensed electrician. I'd worked for Hendricks Electrical for 9 years before the divorce. But after everything fell apart, I couldn't hold down steady work. The jobs required an address, references, stability. I picked up day labor gigs when I could, loading trucks, hauling construction debris, whatever paid cash at the end of the day. It wasn't that I couldn't work as an electrician. It was that I couldn't prove I was reliable anymore. Not while living in a shelter. Not while my son was being raised in a cafeteria that served donated food. Marcus started first grade this year. I walked him to school every morning from the shelter, a 40-minute trek through streets where other kids got dropped off by parents in SUVs. He never complained. Not once. He'd just hold my hand and ask me questions about clouds or birds or why the sky was blue. "Dad, when we get our own place, can I have a poster of planets?" he'd asked last week. "Yeah, buddy. All the planets you want. Even Pluto?" "Especially Pluto." That morning, after breakfast in the shelter dining hall, I was getting ready to walk Marcus to school when a woman approached us in the lobby. She was in her early 40s, wearing a gray coat and carrying a leather briefcase. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional bun, and she had the kind of presence that made you stand up straighter. "Excuse me," she said, looking directly at me. "Are you Owen Brennan?" I instinctively moved Marcus behind me. "Who's asking?" "My name is Simone Rathbone. I'm an attorney with Rathbone and Associates in Toronto. Do you have a few minutes to talk? I'm about to take my son to school." "I understand. This won't take long, but it's important. It concerns your uncle's estate." I stared at her. "My uncle? Donald Brennan. He passed away 6 months ago. My Uncle Donald. I hadn't seen him in probably 10 years. He was my father's younger brother, a man who'd kept to himself after my dad died. Donald had never married, never had kids. He'd worked in real estate development. I knew that much, but we'd never been close. I'd sent him a Christmas card maybe twice in my adult life. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully, "but I don't see what that has to do with me." Simone reached into her briefcase and pulled out a file folder. "Mr. Brennan, your uncle left you something in his will. I've been trying to track you down for 3 months. You're not an easy man to find. I've been moving around. I can see that." She glanced around the shelter lobby. "Is there somewhere private we can talk?" The shelter had a small office they let residents use for important meetings. I asked Marcus to wait in the common room, where there was a volunteer reading to kids. Then I followed Simone into the cramped space with a desk and 2 chairs. She opened the folder and spread several documents across the desk. Your Uncle Donald owned a commercial property in Toronto, an apartment building on Danforth Avenue, 12 units. He purchased it in 1998. I leaned forward, trying to make sense of the papers in front of me. "Okay, According to his will, which was executed 17 years ago and never modified, that property was left to you, Owen. Not to your father's estate, not to any other family member. To you specifically. The room felt like it was tilting. That doesn't make sense. Why would he leave me a building? We barely spoke. I don't know his reasoning, but the will is clear. The problem is, she pulled out another set of documents. The property has been managed by a company called Morrison Property Holdings for the past 8 years. They've been collecting all the rental income, approximately $8,000 per month after expenses. That's close to $100,000 per year. For 8 years, Morrison. That name again. Wait, I said, my heart starting to pound. Morrison Property Holdings. Is that? Yes. The company is owned by Gerald Morrison, your ex-wife's father. I sat back in the chair, trying to process what she was saying. How is that possible? If Donald left the building to me, that's what I'm trying to find out. When I reviewed the property records at the city, the deed was recorded in your uncle's name until his death. But there's a property management agreement on file, dated 8 years ago, giving Morrison Property Holdings full authority to manage the building. However, she pulled out another document. This agreement was supposedly signed by your Uncle Donald. I had a handwriting expert examine it. It's a forgery. The room was spinning now. Are you telling me that Vanessa's father has been stealing income from a property that belongs to me? That's exactly what I'm telling you. And it gets worse. 3 months ago, Gerald Morrison attempted to file a claim on the property, arguing that your uncle owed him money and that the building should be transferred to Morrison Property Holdings as payment for a debt. That claim is what triggered my firm's investigation. We were hired by the estate trustee to verify the will's instructions. Who's the estate trustee? A colleague of your uncle's named Thomas Everett. He's the one who hired us when he realized something wasn't right with the property records. I put my head in my hands. 8 years. Gerald Morrison had been stealing from me for 8 years. The same man who'd financed the lawyers that destroyed me in divorce court. The same man whose daughter took everything I had. What happens now? I asked. Now we file a lawsuit. We're going after Morrison Property Holdings for fraud, forgery, and theft. We'll also be filing criminal complaints with the police. This is serious, Mr. Brennan. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen income. I don't have money for lawyers. You don't need it. Our firm is working on contingency for the estate. When we recover the stolen funds, we'll take our fee from that. But there's something else. She pushed a final document toward me. Your uncle's will also established a small trust for living expenses. There's $50,000 available immediately. It was supposed to be released to you upon his death. But she paused. Gerald Morrison convinced the bank that handled the trust that you'd abandoned your claim. He told them you'd moved to British Columbia and couldn't be reached. He produced forged documents showing you'd signed away your rights. I couldn't speak. The scope of this betrayal was so massive I couldn't wrap my mind around it. Mr. Brennan, I need you to come to my office tomorrow. We have paperwork to file, statements to take, and we need to move quickly. Gerald Morrison doesn't know we've found you yet. I want to keep it that way until we're ready. I looked up at her. He knows where I am. Vanessa could tell him I'm at this shelter. Does she visit? She hasn't seen Marcus in 10 months. Not since a supervised visit last spring where she showed up an hour late and left after 20 minutes. Simone's expression hardened. Then we have time. Can you meet me tomorrow at 9? I'll be there. That night, after I'd put Marcus to bed in our shared corner of the shelter dormitory, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. A building. My uncle had left me an apartment building. Why? We'd barely known each other. But then I remembered something my father had said, years ago, before he died. Donald had always been different from the rest of the family. Quieter, more observant. He'd watched how people treated each other, my dad had said. He'd seen things others missed. Had Donald known what would happen to me? Had he somehow predicted that I'd need help? The next morning, I took Marcus to school, and then caught 2 buses to Simone's office in downtown Toronto. The building was in the financial district, all glass and steel. Her firm occupied the 14th floor, and the reception area alone was nicer than anywhere I'd lived in the past year. She met me in a conference room with another lawyer, a younger man named David Chen. Owen, David is our litigation specialist. He's going to be handling the courtroom aspects of this case. David shook my hand. Mr. Brennan, I've reviewed everything Simone collected. This is one of the most clear-cut fraud cases I've seen. The problem is going to be proving that Gerald Morrison knew the documents were forged. Won't the handwriting analysis show that? It'll show the documents are fake, yes. But Morrison could claim he was deceived, that someone else forged them and brought them to him. We need to prove he was the one behind it. Simone pulled up a laptop and turned it toward me. That's why we need your help. We need information about Gerald Morrison's business practices, his relationship with your uncle, anything that might show a pattern of deception. I spent the next 3 hours telling them everything I knew about the divorce, about how Vanessa's family had systematically isolated her from me during our marriage, about the lawyer, Theodore Whitmore, who'd demolished me in court with resources I couldn't match, about how the custody arrangement had been manipulated to make me look incompetent while actually giving me full responsibility. Whitmore, David said, writing the name down. He's worked with Morrison before. He's their family lawyer, has been for years. That's useful. If we can show a pattern of Whitmore helping Morrison with questionable legal maneuvers, it strengthens our case that this was intentional fraud, not a mistake. By the time I left the office, they had a plan. They'd file the lawsuit within the week. They'd also be contacting the Police Fraud Unit and the Law Society of Ontario to investigate Theodore Whitmore's role in all of this. One more thing, Simone said as I was leaving. The trust fund. We can have those funds released to you within 72 hours. You'll need to set up a bank account. I don't have an address for a bank account. We'll use our office as your mailing address temporarily. David, can you help Mr. Brennan set that up? 3 days later, I had $50,000 in a bank account. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. The first thing I did was rent a small 2-bedroom apartment in Scarborough. Nothing fancy, but it had heat and a lock on the door and a bedroom for Marcus, with space for all the Planet posters he wanted. The second thing I did was buy Marcus new clothes and a warm winter coat. He cried when I showed him his new room. Not sad tears, happy ones. We really get to stay here? He asked, looking around at the empty space. Yeah, buddy, this is home now. Can I paint the walls? Whatever color you want. The lawsuit moved forward. David and Simone worked quickly, filing motions and subpoenas. They got access to Morrison Property Holdings' financial records. What they found was worse than anyone had expected. Gerald Morrison hadn't just stolen the rental income from my uncle's building. He'd also taken out loans against the property, using forged documents to claim ownership. He'd mortgaged my building for $300,000 and pocketed the money. The building I owned now had debt attached to it that I'd never authorized. This is criminal, David said during one of our meetings. This isn't just civil fraud anymore. This is theft, forgery, and fraud on a massive scale. The Police Fraud Unit opened an investigation. They executed a search warrant on Morrison Property Holdings' office and seized computers, files, everything. They also searched Theodore Whitmore's law office. What they found there changed everything. Whitmore had kept copies of all his communications with Gerald Morrison. Emails, memos, notes from phone calls. In one email from 6 years ago, Morrison had written, "We need to make sure Brennan never finds out about the Danforth property. If he discovers Donald left it to him, everything falls apart." Whitmore had responded, "As long as he stays broke and desperate, he won't be looking into property records. The divorce settlement ensures he's too busy surviving to ask questions." They'd planned it, all of it, the divorce that left me with nothing, the custody arrangement that gave me full responsibility but no resources. They'd wanted me homeless, struggling, too overwhelmed to ever discover what my uncle had left me. 4 months after Simone first found me at the shelter, Gerald Morrison was arrested. So was Theodore Whitmore. The charges included fraud over $5,000, forgery, theft, and conspiracy. Vanessa wasn't charged, but the investigation revealed she'd known about the property. She'd been receiving monthly payments from her father's company, funded by the income he was stealing from my building. The trial took another 6 months. David was brilliant in court. He presented the forged documents, the handwriting analysis, the emails proving conspiracy. He showed how Morrison had systematically robbed me while working to keep me too poor to fight back. The judge's ruling was swift and harsh. Gerald Morrison was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Theodore Whitmore lost his law license and received 3 years. Morrison Property Holdings was ordered to pay me 8 years of stolen rental income, plus the $300,000 he'd borrowed against my property, plus interest, plus punitive damages. The total came to $1.2 million. I sat in that courtroom, Marcus beside me. School had been canceled that day for a snowstorm, so I'd brought him with me, and I couldn't quite believe it was real. The man who'd destroyed my life was going to prison. The lawyer who'd helped him was finished, and I had enough money to give my son the childhood he deserved. But the money wasn't the important part. The important part was what happened after the sentencing, when Gerald Morrison was being led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He looked at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw fear in his eyes. "You don't know what you've done," he said. "I know exactly what I've done," I replied. "I've stopped letting you steal from me." 3 months later, after all the financial settlements were complete and the building ownership was officially transferred to my name, I hired a property manager to handle the Danforth building. A legitimate one this time, with proper contracts and oversight. The rental income, minus expenses and the property manager's fee, came to about $7,000 per month. Enough to live on comfortably while I figured out what came next. I also enrolled in a business management course at a local college. If I was going to own rental property, I wanted to understand how to do it right. Marcus started 2nd grade in a school near our apartment, where he made friends and joined the soccer team and came home every day with stories about his teacher and his classmates and the art projects they were working on. Vanessa reached out once, after the trial ended. She called and asked if she could see Marcus. I told her she could, but it would be on my terms. Supervised visits, consistent schedule, no breaking promises to him. She came to one visit. She was 45 minutes late and spent most of the hour on her phone. Marcus asked me afterward if he had to see her again. "Not if you don't want to, buddy. I don't think she really wants to be my mom." "That's her loss," I said. "You're the best kid in the world." The thing nobody tells you about revenge, if you can even call it that, is that it doesn't feel the way you expect. I'd spent months imagining what it would be like to see Gerald Morrison face consequences. I'd thought it would feel triumphant, victorious, satisfying in some dramatic way. But when it actually happened, what I felt was mostly relief. Relief that the lying was over. Relief that the theft had stopped. Relief that my son and I could finally breathe without wondering where we'd sleep that night. One evening, about a year after everything was settled, Marcus and I were sitting in our living room. He was working on a school project about the solar system, carefully gluing pictures of planets onto poster board. I was reviewing financial statements from the property manager. "Dad?" Marcus said, not looking up from his project. "Yeah, buddy?" "My friend Aiden at school said his mom and dad fight about money all the time. He said they might have to move because they can't pay their bills." "That's tough for Aiden." "Were we like that? When we lived at the shelter?" I put down the financial statements. "We were going through a hard time, yeah. But we're okay now?" "We're okay now." He nodded, carefully positioning Saturn on his poster. "Good. I like being okay." "Me too, buddy. Me too." Looking back, I understand now what my Uncle Donald was trying to do. He'd watched our family for years. He'd seen how people like Gerald Morrison operated using wealth and connections to control and manipulate others. He'd probably watched my marriage to Vanessa and seen where it was headed. So he'd left me something they couldn't touch. Something that would be there when I needed it most. He'd left me a way out. I wish I could thank him. I wish I could tell him that his gift didn't just save my life, it saved my son's childhood. But since I can't do that, I do the next best thing. I pay attention. I watch for people who might be in situations like I was, trapped by systems designed to keep them down. And when I can, I help. The building on Danforth has 12 units. 3 of them are now rented at below market rates to single parents who are trying to get back on their feet. One is occupied by a woman who left an abusive marriage and needed a safe place to land. Another by a man who aged out of foster care and had nowhere to go. I can afford to do this because of what my uncle left me. Not just the property, but the example. Wealth isn't about accumulation. It's about what you build with it, who you help with it, what kind of world you leave behind. Marcus is 9 now. He doesn't remember much about the shelter, and I'm grateful for that. What he does remember is that we got through it together, that when things were hard, we didn't give up, that eventually, if you keep pushing forward, justice finds a way. His bedroom is covered in planet posters, just like he wanted. Pluto has the place of honor, right above his bed. Sometimes I stand in the doorway and watch him sleep, and I think about how close we came to losing everything, How different our lives could have been if Simone Rathbone hadn't spent 3 months tracking me down. If my uncle hadn't left that will. If one single thing had gone differently. But it didn't. And we're here. And we're okay. That's the lesson I try to teach Marcus now. That bad people sometimes do terrible things, but that doesn't mean they win. That justice might take time, but it's worth fighting for. That family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up when you need them most. My Uncle Donald showed up for me, even after he was gone. Simone and David showed up for me when I had nothing to offer in return. The volunteers at the shelter showed up for us when we had nowhere else to go. And now I show up for others. Because that's what you do when you've been given a second chance. You don't just take it and walk away. You turn around and offer your hand to whoever's still climbing out of the hole you escaped. Gerald Morrison got out of prison after serving 2.5 years. I heard he moved to Manitoba, trying to rebuild his reputation far from Ontario. Theodore Whitmore never practiced law again. Vanessa sent a birthday card to Marcus last year. He put it in a drawer and never opened it. As for me and Marcus, we're still in that apartment in Scarborough. It's not fancy, but it's ours. The building on Danforth keeps generating income, and I keep using that income to build something decent, something my uncle would be proud of. Last week, Marcus asked me if we were rich now. We're comfortable, I said. What's the difference? Rich means you have more than you need. Comfortable means you have enough. We have enough. He thought about that for a moment. Is enough better than rich? I think so. Enough means you can help other people have enough too. He smiled. Then I'm glad we're enough. Me too, buddy. Me too. The truth is, I don't know why my uncle chose me. Maybe he saw something in me I didn't see in myself. Maybe he just wanted to make sure Gerald Morrison didn't win. Maybe it was random kindness from a man who had nobody else to leave his property to. But I choose to believe he knew. Somehow, he knew I'd need it, and he made sure it was there. That's the thing about legacy. It's not about the money or the property or the things you leave behind. It's about the doors you open for people who come after you, the chances you give them, the belief you show in them when they can't believe in themselves. My uncle believed in me before I ever believed in myself. Now I get to do the same for others. And that, more than any amount of money, is what makes all of this worth it. If you find yourself in a situation like mine, trapped by people with more resources, more connections, more power, don't give up. Document everything. Ask questions. Look for the helpers, because they're out there. And remember that justice, while slow, has a way of finding the light. You're stronger than you think. Your story isn't over. And sometimes, the people who bet against you end up being the ones who lose everything. Keep fighting. Keep believing. Keep showing up for the people who matter. Everything else will follow.